From forgotten folklore to hidden histories, some records demand to be found. The Bell Witch has inspired novels, films, television episodes, podcasts, and one of America's oldest ghost tourism destinations. If you have encountered American supernatural horror, there is a good chance you have already met a version of this story without realizing it. But when you strip away 2 centuries of retelling and return to the surviving documents, the Bell Witch looks surprisingly different. What if the earliest written account contained almost none of the story people know today? October 19, 1820. Captain John R. Bell had spent months crossing the American frontier with Stephen H. Long's expedition. He was not looking for ghosts. He was looking for dinner. That afternoon, he stopped at a plantation called Murphy's, about 28 miles north of Nashville. The earliest surviving account of the Bell Witch comes from the journal he kept that day. Captain Bell does not name John Bell, Betsy Bell, Kate, or the Bell farm. He was not related to the family, and may not have known their names. He writes that rather a singular circumstance was related to him. A girl about 15, living 3 miles away, was accompanied by a voice. The voice said she should marry a man, a neighbor. Thousands had visited to hear it. It answered questions. Visitors left as little satisfied in their curiosity as before they heard it. Then Captain Bell records the skeptical explanation already attached to the story. Many people, he wrote, thought it was ventriloquism, spelled that way in the published journal, imposed on hearers either by the girl or by her brother. That is the entire entry. One voice, a marriage prediction, a crowd, a doubt, and nothing else. 36 years pass. The next source is not a diary, but a newspaper reprint. The Green Mountain Freeman of Montpelier, Vermont, February 7, 1856. Accessed through the Library of Congress facsimile. The article is called The Tennessee Ghost. It opens by referring to a late post and ends with the attribution Saturday Evening Post, so a Philadelphia story was being reprinted in Vermont. The exact original post issue has not been verified, but the reprint itself is enough to examine. This version is more specific than Bell's. It names Old Mr. Bell and Miss Betsy Bell. It describes a voice moving through the house after dark. People came from 50 miles or more to hear it, and when asked how long it intended to remain, the voice answered, "Until Joshua Gardner and Betsy Bell get married." That line is directly verified from the facsimile. So is the explanation that follows? Betsy Bell was a ventriloquist, a different word from Bell's ventriloquism, and the ghost was a plan to bring about a marriage. Still no supernatural claim, still anchored to a human explanation. But the story has grown. It now has names, a location, a motive. Another 38 years. Martin V. Ingram, a newspaper editor and collector of local tradition, published an authenticated history of the famous Bell Witch in 1894, more than 70 years after the events were supposed to have begun. Ingram's story begins where most Bell Witch stories begin. Strange sounds on the Bell farm, knocking in the walls, scratching at the door. Then a voice, one that answers questions, speaks to visitors, and eventually names itself. According to Ingram, the voice called itself Kate. Kate Batts, a neighbor said to have quarreled with John Bell. What follows is a slow escalation. The voice torments Betsy Bell with slaps and hair-pulling. It shows tenderness toward John's wife, Lucy, and it reserves its deepest violence for John Bell himself. A vial of dark liquid appears in the house. The family cat dies after tasting it. John Bell's health collapses. On December 20, 1820, he dies. The voice claims responsibility. Then comes Andrew Jackson. In the version Ingram preserves, Jackson was traveling toward the Bell place when his wagon stopped dead. The horses would not pull. Whipping could not move it. Jackson threw up his hands. By the eternal boys, it is the witch. A sharp, metallic voice answered from the bushes. All right, General. Let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight. The men searched the brush. They found no one. Jackson called it worse than fighting the British. But Ingram was not a contemporary witness. His book is a folklore compilation, rich, detailed, and not the same kind of document as a passing officer's journal or a skeptical newspaper column. 3 documents. 1 journal from 1820 that contains almost nothing. 1 newspaper from 1856 that contains names, a courtship, and a human explanation. 1 book from 1894 that contains a fully developed supernatural legend. The following is fiction, one possible version of events that the surviving record makes room for but cannot confirm. It is not a claim about what happened. It imagines the human cost hidden between the lines of history. There was a wedding everyone in Robertson County expected. Betsy Bell was 18 years old, and Joshua Gardner was the neighbor's son who had grown up beside her and who everyone assumed would one day marry her. It was neither a secret nor a scandal. John Bell, her father, was proud of both of them and saw no reason the future should be any different. Then a voice began to be heard in the Bell house. No one could agree on where it came from or what it was. Whether Betsy produced it herself, whether it was something in the walls, whether it was a trick of the ear, or a presence that had no name. The only thing the witnesses shared was uncertainty. The voice spoke of marriage. It said Joshua Gardner would marry Betsy Bell. Joshua, half joking, asked Betsy one evening when the wedding might be. Betsy laughed and asked the voice. It answered. She asked again the next night, and it answered again. Not because she believed it was a ghost, but because she was young and curious, and the curiosity of a young woman does not imagine it is creating a legend. It never occurred to her that she was performing. Visitors came with questions. Somehow, the voice always seemed to have an answer. Joshua's parents grew troubled. His father said to him, without cruelty, "You can marry the girl if you wish, but you cannot marry the ghost." Joshua continued visiting, but something had shifted. He came one afternoon with apples from his father's orchard, and Betsy understood before he spoke that he was already leaving. He smiled too quickly. He looked at the floor, at the window, at anything except her face. He repeated what his father had said, laughing to show he did not believe it. But Betsy did not laugh, because she saw what he could not yet admit, that every visit to her house made him part of a spectacle he had not chosen, and he was not strong enough to carry that weight alone. He stopped coming after that. The voice never mentioned the wedding again. It had no wedding to mention. John Bell watched his daughter's future dissolve and could not find a way to stop it. The minister came to pray with the family and suggested quietly that Betsy be sent away to relatives for a season until the talk subsided. John refused. To send her away, he believed, would be an admission of guilt, an acknowledgement that she had produced the voice, that the family had something to hide. He meant to protect her. Instead, he kept her at the center of the story, where the community could watch and draw its own conclusions. The minister left without argument. The silence of his departure was louder than any sermon. Neighbors took it as confirmation. If John called the voice a ghost, they thought him deluded. If he insisted Betsy was innocent, they thought him a father covering for his daughter. Every position was a trap, and the harder he fought to shield her, the more certain the county became that there was something to shield her from. That autumn, a woman named Kate Batts came to the Bell farm. She was older, a widow who managed her own land and spoke as plainly as any man in the county. She had known the family for years. She told John Bell what she believed. "Stop letting strangers into your house. You are feeding the story." John took offense. He did not ask her to leave, but the argument was overheard, and within a week it had been repeated across the county. Someone said, "Didn't Kate Batts quarrel with John Bell?" Someone else replied that she had always been strange. By the time the rumor reached the next settlement, it had become certain knowledge. Kate Batts had cursed the Bell family. Kate Batts was the voice. She had come to the farm, meaning to help. Her attempt to help became the story that condemned her. John Bell died in December 1820, a natural death, as far as anyone could determine, at the end of a life marked by years of public scrutiny and private grief. But a community that had spent years arguing about a witch could not accept a natural ending. The witch must have killed him. A vial must have appeared. The story of the poison vial emerged not from cruelty, but from the simple human inability to let a mystery dissolve without resolution. By the time Martin Ingram collected the story in 1894, the original events had been almost entirely absorbed into the legend that grew from them. Betsy Bell had become a footnote. Joshua Gardner had disappeared from the record entirely. John Bell survived only as a victim. And Kate Batts, a woman who outlived John Bell, who managed her own land, who had neighbors and a life that had nothing to do with witchcraft, had become the Bell Witch. Years later, the visitors still came. They asked about the witch. They did not ask what became of Betsy. They did not know Joshua Gardner's name. Kate Batts died carrying a story she had never chosen. The voice remained. Everything else was forgotten. History only leaves us the fragments. The rest lives in the shadows. Thank you for exploring these dark corners with me tonight. If you enjoy where folklore meets history, hit that like button and subscribe to join the circle for our next tale.